This is a great question. It's one I get a lot. And first off, I'll just summarize and say it doesn't really matter that much, but I'll zoom out for a second and first just explain what is the stimulus, what is the question stem. The stimulus is the short, bite-sized argument. It might start off with an editorial or a critic, someone giving some sort of argument, typically flawed in some way. It's a paragraph that is pretty dense text. Then you have your question stem, which is the short, single-line question where LSAT is asking you to strengthen the argument or weaken the argument or do a variety of other things to the argument. Now, back when I was studying, I actually read the stimulus first, I was told to, and it seemed to work okay for me. But over time, I've actually transitioned to a question stem first approach because I believe it gives you the proper perspective from which to view the argument in the stimulus. But I've done it both ways. I've gotten high scores both ways, and there are plenty of top performers who do it both ways. So I think ultimately it doesn't really matter that much. Do what works for you. If one way isn't working, switch it up and see if that changes anything. I think part of it comes down to reading actively as if you were having a conversation with someone. I like to think of it as you're having a debate with someone and you're pointing out why they're wrong. And not every question is a flaw question or a weakened question, but that way of thinking to look at the gaps in the argument and evaluate them, like someone's having a conversation with you, I think really does make it more real world relatable. The other thing I'd say is identify what's the conclusion, what's the evidence, and go from there. Look for keywords or look at the relationship between the different parts and see, can you find the conclusion? That's the first step. If then find the evidence, then look at the gap, then of course the question stem will tell you what you want to be doing, and that can lead you to start making predictions. You can definitely skip questions on the LSAT and come back to them at the end. You're not obligated to do everything in the order given. Personally, on logical reasoning, I might flag 4 or 5 questions just to come back to later because I don't want to deal with them in the moment. Maybe it's a tough science topic question. Maybe it's a lengthy parallel reasoning question. Whatever it might be, whatever you don't like, skip it, come back to it at the end. Everything's worth the same, so there's no reason to get bogged down in something difficult. If you're coming back at the end, the nice thing about that to start off with is that you have a fresh perspective. You've gotten all the other questions under your belt, so you do have a certain level of security knowing that at least you finished this section and these questions are the toughest ones anyway, so at least you've tackled everything else. But at this point, that fresh perspective could, maybe not for every single question, of course, but let you see the question in a new light in some way. Maybe some keyword will stand out to you that didn't previously stand out to you. And if not, hey, it's okay. You can get a few wrong and still get a top score. There's not really a one size fits all because part of it depends on your aptitude and your goals. I will say that for anyone reasonably aiming for a 165 or above, I would encourage them to try and tackle the first 10 questions in about 10 to 12 minutes. This lets you build up a time bank where if you flag 4 tough questions, you will have about 5 minutes at the end to come back to them later. And actually, speaking of the digital LSAT, I think that the biggest impact there is that you actually gain time because you used to have to bubble in with the number 2 pencil all those little ovals for 25 questions or 26 questions in a section. Now with one tap of the stylus or one touch of your finger, you can bubble it in instantly. So that's probably giving you another minute or two to add to your time bank for coming back later. But overall, that's my general pacing recommendation. I wouldn't go into more depth on it than that or else you'll drive yourself crazy. But I guess the other thing I would say is don't individually time single questions. Like don't time one LR question to a minute and a half or so because every question is of a different difficulty and the questions really only make sense for timing anyway in the context of the entire section.